My dear, sit down here with me and listen carefully, for what I'm about to tell you is not a common story. I could have kept it to myself, like many things that a woman my age ends up keeping over the years, but something inside me tells me it's time to no longer keep it all in silence. You must be wondering what I'm talking about, and I will tell you. I will tell you the most painful secret of my life, one that remained hidden for so many years. A secret I only discovered when I was in the final stages of my life, when loneliness and frailty gave me a different perspective on what I once considered love and loyalty. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? It all started, or maybe I should say, it all ended, the day I found myself being cared for by a young nurse with gentle eyes and a quiet smile. It was a time when visits to the nursing home became rare. My children, now adults with their own families, rarely came to see me, and loneliness became my constant companion. Your grandfather, who once kept me company, had long been lost to his own space, with a mind clouded by age and illness. It was when I found myself alone and unable to care for myself that we agreed to go to the nursing home, a place for the elderly, where the nurses would care for us. I was used to seeing those young women, who somehow had the responsibility of taking care of our physical pains, but I never imagined that one of them, with such a sweet smile, would be connected to something that would change my life forever. She appeared suddenly, as all nurses appear. She was a young woman, perhaps a little older than you are now, but with a softness in her gaze that gave me some relief, knowing someone was there to care for me. Her name was Anna, and she became one of the nurses who attended to me the most. I didn't really pay much attention to the faces of the nurses at first. They came, helped me, changed my clothes, gave me my medicine, and were always there for us to survive another day. But Anna had something that drew me to her in particular. She was caring, attentive, and seemed so present, as if she genuinely cared for me. In the first days, she was just another nurse, but over time, I started to notice something strange in her behavior, something that made me feel a little uneasy. But at first, I chose to ignore it. There was something in the way she looked at my husband, when he was still with me, as the days passed, and he was still able to walk and talk. He didn't stay at the nursing home with me, but in his own care home. It was then that I noticed Anna's behavior. She looked at him differently. There was something in her eyes, something that, as a woman, I immediately recognized: affection. It wasn't the kind of care you show a patient or someone you look after with compassion. It was something deeper, something that stirred my intuition, something that made me suspicious. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to deal with it. I tried to ignore it because I knew that today's young nurses were full of affection and sometimes treated us as if we were beloved relatives. But something in me told me there was more between them. It was only after a while that the truth came to light. The nurse, in a casual conversation, mentioned her father's name, his name, the same name of a man with whom I knew your grandfather had an affair with a married woman years ago, the same woman who, in secret, had been involved with my husband during the time we were together. My dear, the shock was so great that I almost fell off my chair. How could it be? How was this possible? I looked at her, who continued talking so lightly, and then suddenly everything made sense. The woman who cared for me, the one I saw every day, was the daughter of one of the greatest traumas of my life. She was the daughter of the affair your grandfather had, a secret he had never told me, but somehow she was in my life even though I didn't know it. The weight of this revelation was immense. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. How could she, the same age as my daughter, be so close to me, being directly connected to something I never imagined? At that moment, something inside me broke. I felt betrayed, deceived, as if my life had been a big lie. Not only the betrayal of your grandfather, which I had known about from other times, but now the confirmation that this affair had generated a daughter who was there every day, caring for me without me knowing. How was this possible? How was this allowed? I had suffered so much, and now, as age and disease consumed me, this new pain emerged once again in a way I never imagined. My life, which seemed to be a love story between your grandfather and me, now seemed like a lie. I never imagined that, in the end of my journey, I would find such a devastating surprise. And here I am, after all this time, with a heart still tight, knowing I will never fully understand what happened and how it all unfolded. The love I thought was unbreakable was now shattered. But how, amidst so much pain, did I manage to move forward? How did I deal with this truth? The story is not over, my dear. It's just beginning to be told. My daughter, you must be wondering what really happened. What went on between your grandfather and me for us to get to this point? Sometimes, it seems like life plays tricks on us, and over time, things that seemed perfect end up transforming into something we could never imagine. What I'm about to tell you is the story of the beginning of my marriage to your grandfather, a love that seemed unbreakable, but that slowly began to be corroded by something I didn't even know existed. When I met your grandfather, he was the most charming man I had ever met. He had a unique way about him, always so attentive, so caring, with a smile that seemed to light up any room. We both grew up in a time when marriage was considered sacred, something that should last a lifetime. I was young, full of dreams and hopes, and he seemed to be everything I was looking for. It was hard not to fall in love with him. We met at a party at a friend's house. The place was crowded, but he stood out immediately. I saw him for the first time across the room, talking to some people with that calm manner he had. When our eyes met, it felt as if time stopped for a moment. He came over to me with that gentle smile and, as if we had known each other for a long time, started talking like it was the most natural thing in the world. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had always been friends, and at that moment, without even realizing it, I felt my life was about to change forever. Our courtship was intense from the start. I spent hours talking to him, exchanging confidences, making plans for the future. I knew he was the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. He made me feel special in a way no one else had. I felt like he knew me in a unique way, as if he understood what I was thinking before I even spoke. It didn't take long for him to ask me to marry him. The proposal was simple but full of emotion. He took me to our favorite place, where we used to walk by the lake, and there, under a sky full of stars, he asked me the question that would change the course of my life. I didn't hesitate. There was no doubt in my heart that he was the man I wanted to grow old with. I accepted his proposal with joy, knowing that we were about to start a new journey together. Our wedding was beautiful. It wasn't a grand ceremony, but it was enough for us to feel complete. I remember the wedding day as if it were yesterday. We were surrounded by the people we loved, and I, in my white dress and with a smile on my face, walked down the aisle arm in arm with my father. He was there, waiting for me, with a look full of love and happiness, and when he took my hand, I felt as if all my dreams were coming true. The moment felt perfect. I felt like the happiest woman in the world, and my heart beat with the certainty that this was the beginning of a wonderful life with someone I loved deeply. In the first years of marriage, everything seemed to go just as I had imagined. We bought our house, started building a life together, and little by little we got to know each other more, sharing dreams, joys, and even some difficulties. He was always a man dedicated to work, but he never stopped being caring toward me. He took care of me in ways I never imagined. He was sweet, gentle, and always willing to make me feel loved and protected. I, in turn, was the devoted wife, concerned with his well-being and with our home. Our house was full of laughter, full of plans for the future. But, as happens with many marriages, difficulties began to appear. At first, they were small things, details you don't pay much attention to. Perhaps the lack of time, the responsibilities of work, the concerns of daily life. I didn't realize that these small things were slowly pushing us apart. He began to be more absent, more distant. It wasn't something I could identify immediately, but something began to change. He, who once was always by my side, was now frequently busy, involved in projects, leaving for business, and coming back later than usual. I didn't want to believe that something was wrong, so I started justifying his behavior, believing that he was simply overwhelmed with work. After all, we all went through tough times, right? The first big crisis came when he started traveling more. It was always something last minute, a business meeting, a work trip he had to make. I understood, but I also began to miss him, and more than that, I started feeling like he was emotionally distancing himself from me. The longing began to become a weight in my chest. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just a phase, something that would pass soon. But the emptiness I felt wasn't just from his physical absence, but from the lack of connection between us. I began to realize that the distance wasn't just geographical, but emotional. He seemed more closed off, more distracted, and I didn't know what to do to bring him back to me. I began wondering if I had done something wrong. I knew he wasn't perfect, but I always saw him as the man of my life, the one I wanted to grow old with. Did he think the same about me? What was happening? I tried to talk to him about it, but there was always an excuse, a justification. Maybe it was work. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he needed more time alone. He told me he loved me, and I believed him. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. I saw a man who was drifting away from me, and I felt powerless to bring back the man who once loved me deeply. It was at this moment that I began to realize that, while I tried to understand what was happening, he had already gotten lost in something I didn't know, something I never imagined could exist between us. And soon after, the revelation of his betrayal would come to light in a way I could never have imagined. Claro, aqui está o tópico 3, desenvolvido com 1250 palavras em formato de storytelling, com a tradução para o inglês ao final. Tópico 3. A chegada do asilo, quando a idade chegou. Minha querida, há muitos momentos na vida em que pensamos que temos o controle de tudo, mas o tempo é um senhor implacável. Ele nos leva sem pedir permissão, e quando nos damos conta, estamos mais velhos, mais fracos, e o mundo ao nosso redor parece ter mudado de forma irreversível. A juventude, com todas as suas promessas de vitalidade e liberdade, começa a se dissipar, e nos vemos à mercê de algo maior do que nós mesmos. Eu vi isso acontecer com o seu avô, e um dia, também com minha própria saúde. Quando as pernas começaram a fraquejar e a visão já não era a mesma, eu soube que era hora de tomar uma decisão que nunca imaginei que precisaria tomar. Foi difícil, minha filha, mas a verdade é que o envelhecimento não pede licença. Ele chega sem avisar, se instala e, como quem não quer nada, começa a nos transformar. Quando os anos começaram a pesar sobre nós, eu e seu avô passamos a perceber que não conseguíamos mais cuidar um do outro da mesma forma que antes. Eu sentia uma falta de ar que não passava. As dores nas articulações se tornaram constantes, e as forças para fazer até as coisas mais simples começaram a desaparecer. Olhava para ele e via que ele também não estava bem, com a mente dele cada vez mais embaçada e o cansaço tomando conta de seu corpo. Foi então que a ideia de um asilo entrou nas nossas vidas e parecia ser a única solução viável. Mas, minha querida, o que eu jamais imaginei, o que eu não poderia prever, era que esse novo capítulo da nossa vida traria algo que mudaria tudo o que eu acreditava sobre a confiança e sobre o que significava estar com alguém até o fim. A decisão não foi fácil. Eu sempre sonhei em envelhecer ao lado dele, dentro de nossa casa, com a familiaridade dos nossos quadros na parede e os móveis que compramos com tanto esforço. Nossa casa era um reflexo da nossa vida, de todos os anos que passamos juntos. Eu pensava que íamos envelhecer ali, como dois velhos felizes, sentados à beira da lareira, contando histórias para os netos. Mas a realidade é que, com a chegada da velhice, algumas decisões se tornam inevitáveis. O asilo foi a opção, e foi com um peso imenso no coração que nos mudamos para aquele lugar. No começo, a adaptação foi difícil. Aquele lugar não tinha a mesma energia, a mesma alegria que nossa casa. Os quartos eram pequenos, a comida não tinha o mesmo sabor de casa, e a sensação de estar distante de tudo o que eu conhecia era desconcertante. Mas o que mais me incomodava era a ideia de ver seu avô lá, ao meu lado, em um ambiente onde tudo parecia frio, distante. Eu tentava disfarçar minha tristeza, mas o fato de nos vermos ali, em um lugar que não era nosso, mexia com meu espírito. As primeiras semanas foram tranquilas, ou pelo menos parecia. As enfermeiras eram amáveis e educadas, mas eu não podia deixar de notar a falta de cuidado, a falta de intimidade. Aquelas jovens não nos conheciam, não sabiam da nossa história, e apesar de serem muito educadas, havia um vazio ali. um vazio que não podia ser preenchido apenas com boas intenções. Elas estavam ali para cuidar de nós, mas o cuidado delas parecia ser mais mecânico, quase como se fosse um trabalho qualquer. Não havia, como em casa, aquele toque carinhoso, aquele olhar afetuoso que só a convivência de anos pode proporcionar. Foi durante esse período de adaptação, em um desses dias comuns, que Ana começou a se destacar para mim. Ela era uma das enfermeiras mais novas do asilo, e ao contrário de algumas das outras que estavam mais distantes, ela sempre parecia estar de bom humor e tinha uma atenção especial para comigo e para o seu avô. Ela me chamava com delicadeza, sempre se preocupando com o meu bem-estar e fazendo perguntas sobre a minha saúde. Eu achava isso estranho. Na verdade, ela parecia mais interessada do que as outras enfermeiras, e ao contrário delas, ela era muito mais presente. Eu, que já estava acostumada com a solidão e o distanciamento dos outros, comecei a me sentir tocada por sua simpatia, mas também confusa. Algo em mim me dizia que ela se importava, mas ao mesmo tempo havia algo em seu comportamento que não me parecia totalmente adequado. Não era só o cuidado que ela demonstrava. Havia algo mais profundo, algo que eu não conseguia entender. Durante os dias seguintes, comecei a prestar mais atenção nela, e a cada olhar que ela trocava com o seu avô, algo dentro de mim se aperfeiçoava, como se uma pequena luz de alerta começasse a piscar na minha mente. Eu sabia que a vida é feita de circunstâncias, que talvez eu estivesse exagerando, mas não pude deixar de notar como ela se aproximava dele de forma peculiar. Ele, sempre tão distante e perdido em seus pensamentos, parecia de alguma maneira mais animado quando ela estava por perto. Eu não queria pensar o pior, mas minha intuição, que sempre foi afiada, me dizia que algo estava acontecendo. Como mulher, algo em meu coração começou a questionar a relação deles. Eu não falava sobre isso com ninguém, porque parecia absurdo, mas em minha mente, a ideia de que algo estava se passando entre ela e o seu avô não me deixava em paz. Eu tentava esquecer, tentava focar nas minhas próprias limitações físicas, mas a imagem dela, a maneira como ela o tratava, sempre me perseguiam. Não havia malícia explícita, mas algo parecia estar escondido ali, em um lugar onde eu não conseguia chegar. O que eu via era apenas um cuidado excessivo, mas minha intuição me dizia que havia mais do que isso. Um dia, depois de algumas semanas, eu perguntei a ela sobre sua família. Ela começou a falar sobre sua infância, sobre seu pai. E foi nesse momento, durante uma conversa casual, que ela mencionou o nome de seu pai. O nome, minha querida, era o mesmo de um homem que eu sabia que seu avô tivera um caso. O nome de um homem que se entrelaçou em nossa vida, e mesmo que eu nunca soubesse os detalhes, eu sabia que aquele caso tinha sido algo que não poderia ser esquecido. Agora, eu entendo que a vida tem maneiras muito sutis de nos colocar à prova. Às vezes, somos confrontados com nossas maiores verdades de formas que nunca esperamos. Eu não sabia naquela hora o impacto que essa simples revelação teria, mas a partir dali, tudo começou a fazer sentido. Ana era filha de um segredo do passado de seu avô, e essa verdade, tão dolorosa quanto inesperada, mudou a maneira como eu via tudo ao meu redor. Ela era filha do caso que ele teve, e de repente me senti envolvida em uma teia de mentiras e segredos que nunca imaginei. Aidgidi and translation into English. Topic 3. The arrival of the nursing home. When age came, my dear, there are many moments in life when we think we have control over everything, but time, oh, time is a merciless master. It takes us without asking for permission, and before we realize it, we are older, weaker, and the world around us seems to have changed irreversibly. Youth, with all its promises of vitality and freedom, begins to dissipate, and we find ourselves at the mercy of something bigger than ourselves. I saw this happen to your grandfather, and one day, to my own health. When my legs began to falter and my vision was no longer the same, I knew it was time to make a decision I never thought I'd need to make. It was difficult, my daughter, but the truth is that aging doesn't ask for permission. It arrives unannounced, settles in, and, as if unconcerned, begins to transform us. When the years began to weigh on us, your grandfather and I realized that we could no longer care for each other in the way we once did. I felt a shortness of breath that didn't pass. The joint pains became constant, and the strength to do even the simplest tasks began to disappear. I looked at him and saw that he wasn't well either, his mind growing clouded and his body tired. It was then that the idea of a nursing home came into our lives, and it seemed to be the only viable solution. But my dear, what I never imagined, what I couldn't foresee, was that this new chapter of our life would bring something that would change everything I believed about trust and what it meant to be with someone until the end. The decision wasn't easy. I always dreamed of growing old with him, inside our home, with the familiarity of the pictures on the wall and the furniture we had bought with so much effort. Our house was a reflection of our life, of all the years we spent together. I thought we would grow old there, like two old happy people sitting by the fireplace, telling stories to the grandchildren. But the reality is that, with the arrival of old age, some decisions become inevitable. The nursing home was the option, and with a heavy heart, we moved into that place. At first, the adaptation was difficult. That place didn't have the same energy, the same joy that our home had. The rooms were small, the food didn't have the same taste as home, and the feeling of being far from everything I knew was unsettling. But what bothered me most was the idea of seeing your grandfather there, by my side, in a place that wasn't ours, with a coldness and distance that I could never get used to. The first few weeks were calm, or at least it seemed. The nurses were kind and polite, but I couldn't help but notice the lack of closeness, the lack of intimacy. Those young women didn't know us, didn't know our story, and although they were very polite, there was an emptiness there, an emptiness that couldn't be filled with good intentions alone. They were there to care for us, but their care seemed mechanical, almost as if it were just a job. There wasn't, as there was at home, that loving touch, that affectionate look that only years of living together could provide. It was during this period of adaptation, on one of those ordinary days, that Anna started to stand out to me. She was one of the youngest nurses at the nursing home, and unlike some of the others who were more distant, she always seemed to be in good spirits and had a special attention toward me and your grandfather. She would call me gently, always concerned about my well-being and asking questions about my health. I found that odd. In fact, she seemed more interested than the other nurses, and unlike them, she was much more present. I, who was already used to the solitude and distance from others, started to feel touched by her kindness, but also confused. Something inside me told me that she cared, but at the same time, there was something in her behavior that didn't seem entirely appropriate. It wasn't just the care she showed. There was something deeper, something I couldn't quite understand. Over the following days, I started paying more attention to her, and with every look she exchanged with your grandfather, something inside me tightened, as if a small warning light began to blink in my mind. I knew life was full of circumstances. Maybe I was exaggerating, but I couldn't stop noticing how she treated him. He, always so distant and lost in his thoughts, seemed somehow more animated when she was near. I didn't want to think the worst, but my intuition, which had always been sharp, told me that something was going on. How could this be? How could this be allowed? I started to question my own feelings, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And then, one day, after some weeks, I asked her about her family. She began to talk about her childhood, about her father. And that's when, in a casual conversation, she mentioned her father's name, his name. The same name of a man with whom I knew your grandfather had an affair. The same man who had intertwined himself in our life, and although I had never known the details, I knew this affair had been something that couldn't be forgotten. My dear, how hard it is to find words to describe what goes through our heart when we are confronted with such a devastating truth. When Anna mentioned her father's name, something inside me simply broke. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, that I was seeing things where there were none. But at the same time, there was a truth that couldn't be ignored. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The name she spoke was not just any name. It was the name of the man with whom your grandfather had an affair, years ago, a secret buried deep in my soul, something I had never known until that moment. The betrayal of your grandfather, which I thought was a distant memory, was now very close, alive in the flesh and blood, in the face of a young nurse who cared for me every day. Her words echoed in my mind, and I could barely understand what was happening. How could it be possible that all these years I had lived with this secret without knowing? How could the daughter of such a hidden affair now be caring for me every day without me ever suspecting the truth? How could a simple nurse with such a sweet smile be the daughter of one of the greatest traumas of my life? The pain was so deep I felt as though I had been struck. I didn't want to believe it, but at the same time, I knew that reality was right there in front of me. I tried to process everything she said, tried to understand what was happening, but my mind refused to accept it. I had dealt with many difficult things throughout my life, but this, my dear, was something I was not prepared to face. What I knew was that somewhere, the truth about your grandfather's affair with that woman had turned into something much larger, something that not only stirred my memories, but also confronted me directly in the present. The fact that she was there, in my day-to-day life, made me feel as if the story of betrayal and lies was repeating itself before my eyes, like a wheel that keeps turning, bringing everything I feared to the surface. That night was one of the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. My mind was full of confusing thoughts, and my heart was heavy. I looked at the ceiling of the nursing home room, trying to understand how life could present me with such a cruel blow. I thought of your grandfather, his words, the promises he made to me, and I wondered how he could have hidden this from me for so long. How could he have allowed that story to remain buried without me knowing what really happened? When the day dawned, it brought with it a sense of despair I couldn't shake off. I knew I had to confront your grandfather, ask him, and more, I needed to understand how all of this came to be. I needed the truth, not some version he would tell me gently, as he always did, but the raw truth, with no half measures. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I needed answers. When I saw him for the first time after I discovered the truth, something inside me wanted to run away, to hide, but I knew I couldn't. I had to face him. He looked at me, as if he knew I already knew, as if he could see in my eyes the pain he had caused. There were no words at first. He knew the secret had been revealed, and I knew he could no longer hide the truth from me. Finally, he spoke. He tried to explain, tried to say that it was a mistake from the past, something that happened when he was confused, not knowing what he wanted. He tried to justify the unjustifiable, as he always did when confronted with his mistakes. But I no longer believed his words. He told me the relationship with that woman didn't mean anything, that it wasn't something that lasted, but the pain I felt wasn't about the affair itself, but about the fact that he had hidden this truth from me. He had deceived me, and deceiving me was the worst kind of betrayal. No matter what he said, no matter how sorry he was, I knew I would never be the same woman after that night. I pulled away from him, not with anger, not with fury, but with a weight in my heart that made me feel as though I had lost something precious, something that could never be regained. What was left between us now was the echo of a love I believed was eternal, but which had been eroded by time and lies. I didn't know what to do next, or whether I could continue living with him, but one thing I knew: trust had been destroyed, and perhaps that could never be rebuilt. That night, alone in my room, I finally let the tears fall. There was no shame in crying. There was no shame in feeling the pain of a love that shattered. However, the sadness didn't last long. When the tears dried, I realized I needed to find the strength to move on, not for him, but for myself. I couldn't live the rest of my life carrying the weight of that lie. I needed to find peace, even if that meant walking my path without him. And from that moment on, my dear, a new phase of my life began, where I would be the protagonist of my own story. My dear, life has a curious way of forcing us to make decisions we never imagined we would have to make. When the truth was revealed, and I faced everything that had happened, something inside me broke, but something in me also grew stronger. I knew I couldn't continue living the same life as before. Things had changed forever, and no matter how immense the pain was, I knew I needed to make a decision. I couldn't continue living under the shadow of this lie. I spent many days thinking about what to do. Should I stay with him, forgive him, and try to rebuild what we had? Or, on the other hand, should I go my own way, seek peace and happiness in another direction? I found myself many times surrounded by confusion. I didn't know what to do, and more, I didn't know what would be better for me. How do you move forward when the trust you had in the person you loved most is shattered? How do you rebuild something that seems to be in pieces? I knew there was no easy answer to this question, and at that moment, the idea of simply leaving seemed like an escape. But at the same time, staying and living with that pain, with the constant reminder of what he had done, seemed like a burden I couldn't carry forever. I knew I needed time, reflection, to understand what I truly wanted for my future. I didn't want to live in the past anymore, with all the lies and betrayals, but the fear of the unknown, the fear of starting over scared me. How could I start over? How could I trust someone again? I spent sleepless nights thinking about everything that had happened. There were moments when I thought about leaving, about walking away from everything. And at other times, the memories of the happy moments we had together made me question my decision. How could I let go of a lifetime spent with him, even with all the pain? It was an endless dilemma, a whirlwind of mixed emotions. I wanted to believe he could change, that he truly regretted it, but a part of me knew the trust had already been broken in an irreparable way. At the same time, I knew that, as a woman, I couldn't allow myself to live my whole life as a victim. I needed to be able to rise again, to move forward, no matter the decision I made. I didn't want to live the rest of my days with fear, with anger, with pain. I wanted to find a way that would allow me to live in peace with myself. The love I felt for him, even after everything, still existed. But now, it was a love mixed with pain, with distrust. It was then that I realized I didn't need his approval to move forward. I didn't need an answer from him, nor did I need him to decide what our life would be. What I needed was an answer from me, something that would allow me to move forward without carrying the pain of the past. The decision was in my hands. It didn't matter what he wanted or what he felt. What mattered now was what I felt, what I wanted for myself. And finally, after many nights of reflection, I made my decision. I decided I needed to distance myself. Not because I loved him any less, but because I needed to respect myself more. I knew I couldn't continue living with the weight of betrayal, with the feeling of being deceived, even if he asked for forgiveness. I didn't want the rest of my days to be marked by that suffering, by that constant doubt. I knew I could be happy again, but only if I moved forward and left behind everything that made me suffer. I took a step toward freedom, toward my own well-being. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew the road would be long, but I also knew I couldn't continue living with the pain he caused me. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to a better place, and that's what I chose, to free myself, even if it was painful, even if it was the end of a chapter in my life. I looked at him for the last time and knew that, despite everything that had happened, he had been an important part of my story. But now, I needed to write my own future, a story where I was the protagonist, not a supporting character in the life of someone who betrayed me. My dear, when we make a decision like the one I made, there is no easy path, no formula for dealing with the pain and confusion. When I decided to step away from your grandfather, I felt I was doing the right thing, but I also knew it would be a solitary journey. The first weeks were the hardest. I looked at the future and saw nothing clear ahead of me, only a dense, impenetrable fog. How could I live without him? Without the man I had spent so many years with, the one I had built my life with? He had always been my companion, my safe harbor, and now he was distant from me, and I was distant from myself. I felt as though I was in the middle of a desert, not knowing where to go. But my daughter, over the months, something began to happen inside me. The pain, which seemed unbearable, began to lose its strength. Each day, I felt a little more freedom, as if, little by little, I was freeing myself from a prison I hadn't even known existed. I began to realize that what had been keeping me trapped wasn't just my love for him, but my own inability to see myself outside of that marriage, outside of that relationship. I had lost so much of myself over the years that I didn't know who I was beyond that role of wife, of companion. Now, alone, I was forced to find myself again, to rediscover the woman I had been before everything started. It was when I began to dedicate more time to myself, to do things that made me happy, that the weight began to lift. I remember one morning when I woke up and decided I needed to go for a walk. I hadn't walked around the streets in a long time because I was always busy with the routine of caring for our home and your grandfather. But that day, something told me I needed a new beginning, a new way of looking at the world. I got up, put on simple clothes, and went out, not knowing where I would go, just to feel the fresh air on my face. The walk was long, and I felt every step as if I were pushing away not only the memories of my marriage, but also my own pain. I walked to a small park where I used to go with your grandfather, long before everything happened. The place seemed the same, but I was different. The pain of before didn't grip me as tightly anymore, and with each step, I felt a sense of lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was at that moment I realized that, despite the sadness and pain that were still with me, I was stronger, more capable of handling whatever came next. Time passed, and little by little, I began to create a new routine. I started doing things for myself, things I had left behind over the years. I started dedicating myself to small personal projects, like painting, something I had always loved but never had the time to do. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with. It was wonderful to reconnect with them and realize that, despite the pain, there was a world out there I had forgotten. The conversations, the laughter, the good times I had with these people helped me reclaim a part of myself that had been dormant. My daughter, life didn't give everything back to me at once. The pain was still there, and there were days when the longing for your grandfather gripped my chest so tightly I could hardly breathe. But I was beginning to realize I didn't need his presence to feel alive. I could live my life for myself, learn to care for myself, and perhaps love myself again, as I did before being a wife and mother. It wasn't easy, and loneliness sometimes made me want to return to the familiarity of pain because it seemed safer, more comfortable. But I knew that if I did that, I would be denying myself the chance to rebuild my own life. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I began to feel a profound change inside me, as if a new energy was filling me. It wasn't the same energy of youth, but it was an energy of transformation, of renewal. I was allowing myself to be who I truly am, without the chains of the past, without the fear of being alone, without the need to justify my choices to anyone. I began to realize that the freedom I sought was not in running away from my past, but in accepting it, in reconciling with it. I couldn't erase the mistakes, the failures, the betrayals that happened, but I could accept that those experiences were part of my journey. And it was this, little by little, that made me feel a deep peace within myself. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore, nor the presence of another person to feel that my life had value. I had value for being who I am, and that was enough. So my daughter, it was in this moment, when the pain no longer weighed so heavily, that I realized that, despite everything I had been through, there was something good to be taken from this experience. I had rediscovered my own worth, my ability to rise, to find strength where there seemed to be none. I was no longer a betrayed wife, a woman who lived in the shadow of another person. I was myself, with my flaws, my fears, my victories, and most importantly, my ability to start over. And so, life, with all its ups and downs, continued, and I, finally, felt ready to live again, without fear of what the future would bring. I was capable of facing tomorrow with the confidence of someone who knows that, even in the face of adversity, we can always find the strength within ourselves to keep moving forward. My dear, throughout life, we learn many things, but perhaps one of the hardest lessons of all is learning to forgive. And when I speak of forgiveness, I'm not talking about a simple forgiveness, the kind we ask for with our mouth, but that our heart still carries the weight of the hurt. I'm talking about a deep forgiveness, the kind that comes from within us, that not only relieves the other person's heart, but most importantly, relieves our own heart. Forgiving is a process, a long and painful one, but it is the only way that allows us to move forward. When I made the decision to step away from your grandfather, something inside me began to shift. I knew I couldn't continue living the same life as before. Things had changed forever, and no matter how immense the pain was, I knew I needed to make a decision. I couldn't continue living under the shadow of this lie. I spent many days thinking about what to do. Should I stay with him, forgive him, and try to rebuild what we had? Or, on the other hand, should I go my own way, seek peace and happiness in another direction? I found myself many times surrounded by confusion. I didn't know what to do, and more, I didn't know what would be better for me. How do you move forward when the trust you had in the person you loved most is shattered? How do you rebuild something that seems to be in pieces? I knew there was no easy answer to this question, and at that moment, the idea of simply leaving seemed like an escape. But at the same time, staying and living with that pain, with the constant reminder of what he had done, seemed like a burden I couldn't carry forever. I knew I needed time, reflection, to understand what I truly wanted for my future. I didn't want to live in the past anymore, with all the lies and betrayals. But the fear of the unknown, the fear of starting over scared me. How could I start over? How could I trust someone again? I spent sleepless nights thinking about everything that had happened. There were moments when I thought about leaving, about walking away from everything. And at other times, the memories of the happy moments we had together made me question my decision. How could I let go of a lifetime spent with him, even with all the pain? It was an endless dilemma, a whirlwind of mixed emotions. I wanted to believe he could change, that he truly regretted it, but a part of me knew the trust had already been broken in an irreparable way. At the same time, I knew that, as a woman, I couldn't allow myself to live my whole life as a victim. I needed to be able to rise again, to move forward, no matter the decision I made. I didn't want to live the rest of my days with fear, with anger, with pain. I wanted to find a way that would allow me to live in peace with myself. The love I felt for him, even after everything, still existed. But now, it was a love mixed with pain, with distrust. It was then that I realized I didn't need his approval to move forward. I didn't need an answer from him, nor did I need him to decide what our life would be. What I needed was an answer from me, something that would allow me to move forward without carrying the pain of the past. The decision was in my hands. It didn't matter what he wanted or what he felt. What mattered now was what I felt, what I wanted for myself. And finally, after many nights of reflection, I made my decision. I decided I needed to distance myself. Not because I loved him any less, but because I needed to respect myself more. I knew I couldn't continue living with the weight of betrayal, with the feeling of being deceived, even if he asked for forgiveness. I didn't want the rest of my days to be marked by that suffering, by that constant doubt. I knew I could be happy again, but only if I moved forward and left behind everything that made me suffer. I took a step toward freedom, toward my own well-being. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew the road would be long, but I also knew I couldn't continue living with the pain he caused me. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to a better place, and that's what I chose, to free myself, even if it was painful, even if it was the end of a chapter in my life. I looked at him for the last time and knew that, despite everything that had happened, he had been an important part of my story. But now, I needed to write my own future, a story where I was the protagonist, not a supporting character in the life of someone who betrayed me. My dear, you've probably heard the saying that time can be a good remedy for pain. But let me tell you something. Time alone doesn't heal anything. What truly heals, what truly frees us from pain, is our own decision to move forward, to leave the pain where it belongs, in the past. I spent so much time suffering, so much time tied to what your grandfather did, that I couldn't see a way out. But over time, I learned that pain only remains as long as we make space for it. And that space is what I needed to close within myself. I spent months in mourning. Mourning not only for the loss of what I thought was a happy marriage, but for the mourning of myself, for everything I was and believed to be. I didn't know who I was without him. I saw myself without a purpose, without a clear path ahead. For so long, I had been with him, and our life was a shared story. He and I together were one unit, one pair. But now, without him, I didn't know how to just be me. The pain blinded me, kept me from seeing possibilities, opportunities for a new life. The first days after our separation were unbearable. I would lie awake at night, my thoughts consumed by what had happened. I remember one particular night when I found myself staring out the window, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to move forward. What was left now of everything we had built together? I didn't know, but I knew that, although the pain was immense, it didn't define me. It was that night, when the silence felt deafening, that I made an important decision. I decided that I wouldn't live in pain any longer. I decided that, despite everything that had happened, I had the power to write my own future. And it was there, in that quiet moment, that I realized healing didn't come from the outside, but from within me. I had to learn to forgive myself, to free myself from the weight of guilt and sadness that I had been carrying. I started slowly. I began making small changes in my routine, simple things, but they had a big impact. I started the day earlier, took more care in how I dressed, and went out for walks around the neighborhood. At first, it seemed like I was just trying to fill the emptiness, but over time, I realized these walks made me feel better. that simply moving, being in contact with the world around me, was already making a difference. Nature, with its silence and beauty, seemed to have something healing about it. I was no longer so closed off, no longer lost in my pain. With each step I took, I felt some of the weight dissipate. I also began reading more, picking up books that had been sitting on my shelf for years, and for some reason I had never read. The words of the authors brought me comfort, helped me reflect on what I was going through, and on how other people had faced their own pains. The stories I read showed me that life continues, even when things seem lost. They gave me the courage to believe that, after everything, my life still had much to offer. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to feel a deep change inside me, as if a new energy was filling me. It wasn't the same energy of youth, but it was an energy of transformation, of renewal. I was allowing myself to be who I really am, without the chains of the past, without the fear of being alone, without the need to justify my choices to anyone. I began to realize that the freedom I sought was not in running away from my past, but in accepting it, in reconciling with it. I couldn't erase the mistakes, the failures, the betrayals that happened, but I could accept that those experiences were part of my journey. And it was this, little by little, that made me feel a deep peace within myself. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore, nor the presence of another person to feel that my life had value. I had value for being who I am, and that was enough. So, my daughter, it was in this moment, when the pain no longer weighed so heavily, that I realized that, despite everything I had been through, there was something good to be taken from this experience. I had rediscovered my own worth, my ability to rise, to find strength where there seemed to be none. I was no longer a betrayed wife, a woman who lived in the shadow of another person. I was myself, with my flaws, my fears, my victories, and most importantly, my ability to start over. And so, life, with all its ups and downs, continued, and I finally felt ready to live again, without fear of what the future would bring. I was capable of facing tomorrow with the confidence of someone who knows that, even in the face of adversity, we can always find the strength within ourselves to keep moving forward. My dear, how time passes, doesn't it? When we look back, we see everything we've lived through, the moments of joy and sadness, the challenges we've faced, and the victories we've achieved. And if there is one thing that time has taught me, it is that true freedom is not in escaping what happened, but in knowing how to embrace what lies ahead. I had been so focused on the pain the past caused me that I didn't realize that, in reality, I held the key to my own freedom in my hands. The key was in how I chose to view the future, how I chose to look at it. I finally understood that living is not about the things we lose, but about the things we gain, the things we can still conquer, the things we can learn to love again, not just others, but ourselves. When I started letting go of the past, the pain it caused began to diminish. I'm not saying the pain disappeared completely, but it no longer had control over me. I was learning to live again, and most importantly, I was learning to be happy on my own, without depending on someone else to validate my happiness. I began to realize that, as the pain faded, the space for new opportunities grew. And the greatest opportunity I found was the freedom I now had to decide what I wanted for my life, without the chains of betrayal, without the scars of what happened. I gave myself permission to dream, to plan a future that was mine, a future where I could be the protagonist of my own story. Freedom didn't come suddenly, nor easily. It was a process. Each day was a step, and with each step I felt stronger, more capable of moving forward. I started dedicating myself more to my work, my friendships, the things that really made me feel good. I discovered that I could be happy in ways I had never imagined before. Returning to do what I loved, dedicating myself to causes and interests that had been forgotten, gave me a sense of renewal that I hadn't felt in many years. I also began to look at the world differently. The fact that I had been betrayed, that I had lived through that pain, didn't mean I was a victim forever. I didn't want to be defined by that. I wanted to be defined by my ability to overcome, by my strength to move forward, by my courage to look at the future with new eyes. The past had taught me to value every moment, to be grateful for what I still had, for what I could still achieve. Pain had taught me to appreciate the simple, the essential, and now I saw life with different eyes. I realized that freedom was not about running away from my past, but about accepting it, reconciling with it. I couldn't erase the mistakes, the failures, the betrayals that happened, but I could accept that those experiences were part of my journey. And it was this, little by little, that made me feel a deep peace within myself. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore, nor the presence of another person to feel that my life had value. I had value for being who I am, and that was enough. So my daughter, it was in this moment, when the pain no longer weighed so heavily, that I realized that, despite everything I had been through, there was something good to be taken from this experience. I had rediscovered my own worth, my ability to rise, to find strength where there seemed to be none. I was no longer a betrayed wife, a woman who lived in the shadow of another person. I was myself, with my flaws, my fears, my victories, and most importantly, my ability to start over. And so, life, with all its ups and downs, continued, and I, finally, felt ready to live again, without fear of what the future would bring. I was capable of facing tomorrow with the confidence of someone who knows that, even in the face of adversity, we can always find the strength within ourselves to keep moving forward. My dear, life has a peculiar way of teaching us what truly matters. When we are young, we think that all we need is success, recognition, and certainty. We go through this journey with our eyes on the future, wanting to achieve everything life has to offer. But as time passes, as the weight of experience accumulates, we begin to realize that the true legacy we leave behind is not in material things, nor in grand accomplishments, but in the lessons we have learned and the ways we have faced the difficulties in life. I have been through so much, my daughter, so many struggles that shaped me and taught me more than I could ever have imagined. When everything seemed lost, when pain seemed to be my only companion, that was when I found my strength. It was in that pain that I discovered resilience, the ability to rise up even after being knocked down. That, my daughter, is what I hope you carry with you the most, the certainty that, no matter how tough the times are, you can always rise again. Life can be cruel and unpredictable, but how you rise is what truly matters. The legacy I leave you is not about wealth, nor about a life without challenges. What I leave is the wisdom of knowing that life's greatest treasures lie in how we face our own storms, how we deal with loss, with betrayal, with those times when we feel we can't go on. What matters is that you never give up on yourself, that you always find strength to move forward. True strength doesn't come from not falling, but from always rising, no matter how many times you fall. I hope you learn to see life with a gentler, more compassionate eye. It is easy to get lost in anger, pain, and the desire for revenge, but I have learned over the years that true peace comes from within. Forgiveness, my dear, is not for the other. It is for you. You free yourself when you forgive, when you let go of the bitterness. That doesn't mean you should allow others to hurt you, but it means you should not carry the weight of pain your whole life. Let it go. That is what truly matters. I also leave for you the understanding that life is made of cycles, of ups and downs. Nothing lasts forever, neither the moments of happiness nor the moments of suffering. What matters is how you adapt to these cycles, how you seize every opportunity to grow and learn. And when everything feels difficult, remember that there is always something to learn, always something good in every experience, no matter how challenging it may be. The legacy I leave you is also the example of someone who found peace after pain, happiness after sorrow. I spent so much time wondering if I would ever be able to be happy again. And now, looking back, I can say yes. I found happiness again, but it was a happiness different from what I knew. It was a happiness built within me, a happiness that comes from acceptance, forgiveness, and the trust that, despite everything, life still has much to offer. I hope you never stop believing in your own strength. I hope you learn to be kind to yourself, to understand that we all make mistakes, that no one is perfect. What matters is what we do with those mistakes, how we learn from them, and how we move forward. Life is not about being perfect. Life is about growing, learning, loving, and being loved, finding joy in the little things, and finding strength in difficulties. I also hope you always know the value of family, friends, the people who truly matter. Life can be full of surprises, but the people who stand by us, who support us, are what really help us get through the tough times. Never underestimate the power of a kind word, a gesture of affection. Never underestimate the importance of being there for others, just as others have been there for you. My dear, looking back, I see how much I've learned and how much I've grown. The legacy I leave you is the legacy of someone who faced adversity with courage, someone who found freedom and peace within themselves, and someone who believes that, no matter what happens, there is always a way to start over. Life is full of surprises, good and bad, but what truly matters is how we face those surprises. And I, my daughter, face them with the certainty that there is always something new waiting for us, something to learn, something to live. The legacy I leave is my story, but more importantly, it is my strength, the strength of someone who was able to rise and move forward, always. My dear, over all these years, I have learned that life is a constant new beginning. Sometimes we hold on to what is past, to what has been lost, and we forget that the future is always ahead of us, waiting. I used to look at the future with fear, afraid of what else life could take from me, of how many more pains I would have to face. But now, my daughter, I see the future in a completely different way. What surprised me the most over the years was discovering that, although suffering is inevitable, it is not the end. It can be a teacher, one that shows us how to be stronger, wiser, and more prepared for what is to come. The future is not something we should fear. I lived many years afraid of what tomorrow might bring. After the betrayal, the pain, the emptiness I felt, I thought I would never be able to look at the future with hope again. But over time, I realized that the future is made of choices, and that, even in the face of adversity, we are the ones who decide how to live. I decided to live with courage, the courage to rise every morning, the courage to move forward, to seek the happiness that was still within my reach. What strikes me the most, my daughter, is that, after everything I've lived through, I can still look at tomorrow with hope. I now see that the future is a blank canvas, and that, with each day, we can paint new horizons, new stories. Even though the past was painful, it prepared me for what was to come. I found strengths I didn't know I had, and that is one of the greatest gifts life gave me. The future is what we make of it, and I chose to live with courage. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be this: never be afraid to start over. Life is made of cycles, and although it may be hard at first, every new beginning teaches us something important about who we are and what we are capable of facing. Don't be afraid to change, to reinvent yourself, to follow new paths. When we look at the future with courage, with the confidence that we can change and learn, the world opens up before us in ways we never imagined. I know that you are still young, that life has many challenges ahead for you, but I want you to know that you have everything inside of you to face them. The most important thing is to never lose faith in yourself. I lived, loved, suffered, and survived. And you can too, because the strength to move forward is inside of you, just as it has always been inside me. No matter what happens, there will always be a way to rise, to move forward, to find peace. What I hope for you, my daughter, is that you live your life with courage, with authenticity, that you don't let the difficulties that arise get you down, that you know that, even in the greatest storms, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Life will challenge you. It will test you. But each challenge is an opportunity for growth, self-awareness, and transformation. I live to tell you this story, so you know that, no matter how difficult things may be, there is always a way to find freedom, to choose happiness, to start over. Life can hurt us, but it can also heal us. I have learned that, in the end, we are the ones who decide how to live. We are the ones who choose whether the pain will destroy us or make us stronger. So, move forward with courage. The future is waiting for you, and it is yours to live. Do not fear what is to come, because deep down, you already have everything you need to be happy. I am proof of that, and I leave you, as my legacy, the courage to live your life with all the love, peace, and strength you have within you. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you. And until the next story.